I'm going to take everything, Marcus. Half of his military pension, the house, everything he fought for will be mine by next month. Those were the last words Jessica Rivera whispered to her divorce attorney before smirking at her deployed husband and signing those papers with a smile that could freeze blood. She had no idea that the combat veteran sitting across from her, the man who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, had already executed the most brilliant strategic countermove in divorce court history. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, sacrifice, and justice. Have you ever given everything for someone, only to have them betray you when you were at your most vulnerable? What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most was planning your destruction? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The fluorescent lights hummed in the military legal assistance office at Joint Base Lewis McChord, just outside Tacoma. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes sat rigid in the standard issue chair, his desert combat uniform still pressed despite the 18-hour flight from Kandahar. At 38, he had served his country for 16 years, earning 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. But today, he looked like just another soldier about to lose everything he'd fought to protect. Jessica Rivera swept into the room like she was walking a runway, her designer boots clicking with practiced confidence. At 32, she was striking, raven black hair cascading over her shoulders, wearing a red leather jacket that cost more than Marcus's monthly combat pay. She looked like someone who had already won, like someone about to get exactly what she wanted. "Traffic was crazy," she said, not sounding apologetic at all. She didn't even glance at Marcus, instead checking her reflection in her phone with the attention she used to reserve for him during their first year of marriage before his second deployment. Derek Chen, her divorce attorney, slid into the chair beside her with the calculated expression of someone who specialized in military divorces. Young, sharp, with a reputation for maximizing settlements from service members. "Mrs. Rivera, based on the preliminary disclosures, we're looking at significant assets. Military pension, VA disability benefits, the family home purchased with his VA loan, and various accounts. You're entitled to a substantial portion under Washington law." Jessica's lips curved into a smile that would make anyone uncomfortable. "I've been ready for months, Derek. The question is whether my soon-to-be ex-husband is prepared to pay for choosing his career over his family for 6 years." Marcus's lawyer, Colonel Patricia Brooks, Retimeter, was a silver-haired JAG officer with 25 years of military legal experience. As she sat beside Marcus reviewing her notes, something in her expression seemed almost amused. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," she said quietly, "are you absolutely certain about this approach? Once we proceed, there's no turning back." Marcus nodded once, his face revealing nothing. The same expression he wore on patrol in hostile territory. "I'm certain, Colonel. Let's proceed." But what Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that 4 months earlier, Marcus had discovered something that changed everything. Something that had turned the loyal husband into a soldier capable of the most sophisticated tactical operations she could never imagine. Something that would make her regret every lie, every secret meeting, every moment she'd spent planning his destruction while he was risking his life overseas. The operation was already complete. She just didn't know it yet. 4 months earlier, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes had been on emergency leave from Bagram Airfield, having returned home unexpectedly when his unit's rotation was cut short due to a security incident. It was 2 a.m. when he quietly opened the door to their house in Lakewood, not wanting to wake Jessica with a surprise homecoming. Instead, he found her in their living room, wrapped in the arms of a man he didn't recognize. Younger, civilian, wearing expensive clothes that screamed money Marcus had never had. They were on his couch, the same couch where he'd said goodbye to her before his last deployment, kissing with the desperate hunger of people who'd been waiting for the soldier to be far, far away. "Just a few more months, Javier," Jessica was whispering against the stranger's lips. "The divorce papers are almost ready. Once he signs them, I'll get half his pension, the house, everything. We can finally be together without hiding." Javier, her personal yoga instructor, Marcus realized with a stab of pain that felt worse than the shrapnel wound in his shoulder, ran his hands through her hair. What if he fights it? Military guys can be stubborn. Jessica laughed, cold and calculating. Marcus? He's a good soldier, but he's simple. Follows orders, does his duty, doesn't ask questions. He's been so focused on playing hero overseas that he has no idea what's happening here. Trust me, he won't see it coming. Marcus had stood there in the shadows of his own home, in the uniform he'd worn through firefights and IED attacks, watching his wife plan his destruction with another man. Feeling something inside him switch into combat mode. Not anger, not pain, but cold, tactical clarity. "How much do you think you'll get?" Javier asked, his hands roaming places that belonged to Marcus. "Derek says at least $200,000 from the house equity, plus half his military pension. That's worth hundreds of thousands over his lifetime. And with his disability rating from that injury, the VA benefits alone are worth a fortune." She kissed Javier again. "We'll have enough to open that wellness center you wanted. Enough to live the life I deserve, not stuck waiting for a soldier who's married to the army." If you were Marcus, what would you have done at this moment? Confronted them or played it smart? Comment below. That night, after Javier had left and Jessica had gone to bed humming like she'd already won, Marcus had sat at his kitchen table, not looking at family photos or wedding albums, but at a single document. His Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System, DEERS records, the documentation that controlled who was entitled to his military benefits. Everything he'd earned, the pension from 16 years of service, the VA disability payments from injuries sustained in combat, the GI Bill benefits, the survivor benefit plan. It was all going to go to a woman who was counting the days until she could take half of it and run away with her yoga instructor. Unless he did something about it. The next morning, Marcus had called his sister. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes was 42, career Army JAG, and had never particularly liked Jessica. She'd always been too professional to say so directly, but Marcus had seen it in her eyes during family events. The way she watched his wife with the careful attention of someone trained to spot deception. "I need your help, Sarah," he'd said over a secure line. And he told her everything. Sarah Hayes had been quiet for a long moment after Marcus finished telling her about what he'd witnessed, about Javier, about Jessica's plan to take everything he'd earned through 16 years of service and sacrifice. Then she'd said, "What do you need me to do?" And Marcus had smiled for the first time in months. A tactical smile, the kind he used before a successful mission. "I need you to become my primary beneficiary for everything, and I need legal documents that prove I'm judgment-proof." Over the next 8 weeks, Marcus and his sister had orchestrated the most sophisticated military legal maneuver in divorce court history. Every asset, every benefit, every piece of property that Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes had accumulated through 16 years of military service was quietly, legally, and completely restructured. The house in Lakewood, purchased with his VA loan, $340,000 in equity, Marcus had refinanced it, taking out every dollar of equity as a cash-out refinance, then immediately used those funds to pay off his sister's substantial student loans from law school, a legitimate family debt, properly documented, leaving the house with zero equity and underwater on the mortgage. The military pension worth potentially millions over his lifetime. Marcus had submitted paperwork to change his survivor benefit plan designation, naming his sister as primary beneficiary instead of his spouse, using a little-known military regulation that allowed such changes during active combat deployments. The VA disability benefits, $3,200 per month for life, tax-free. Those benefits were legally protected from divorce settlements, but Jessica's lawyer didn't know that yet. They'd been counting that money in their settlement calculations. His thrift savings plan, the military's 401k, worth $180,000. Marcus had taken a hardship withdrawal, completely legal under TSP rules, and used it to establish an irrevocable trust for his sister's children, his niece and nephew. The early withdrawal penalties were worth it. The vehicles? Both were sold to a military car buying service, the proceeds used to purchase prepaid military burial plots and long-term care insurance. assets that were legally exempt from divorce settlements. The beauty of military divorce law, Colonel Brooks had explained during one of their secret planning sessions, is that it's incredibly complex. Most civilian attorneys don't fully understand the nuances. The Uniformed Services Former Spouses Protection Act sounds powerful, but it has significant limitations. And many military benefits are simply not divisible in divorce. They just don't know which ones. Sarah Hayes had thrown herself into the mission with the precision of a military operation. "I've been watching that woman for years," she told Marcus. "The way she spent your deployment bonuses on luxury items while you were eating MREs in a combat zone. The way she complained about your service like it was an inconvenience to her lifestyle. I've been waiting for her to show her true colors." Do you think Marcus went too far, or was this justified given Jessica's betrayal? Let me know what you think. The prenuptial agreement had been the key to everything, though they hadn't had one. That was actually the weakness in Jessica's plan. She assumed that without a prenup, she'd automatically get half of everything. But military divorce law didn't work that way, and her lawyer had made the fatal mistake of not being a military divorce specialist. She's going to walk into that courtroom expecting to become financially set for life, Marcus had told his sister. Instead, she's going to discover that she's entitled to a house with no equity, a pension she can't touch, and benefits that are legally protected. But the most brilliant part of the plan wasn't just the asset protection. It was the evidence. Marcus had installed security cameras in his own home before returning to deployment, completely legal since it was his residence. Every meeting between Jessica and Javier had been recorded. Every conversation about taking his money had been documented. Every moment of her betrayal had been preserved in crystal clear 1080p video. Military divorce courts take adultery seriously, Colonel Brooks had explained, especially when it involves a spouse who's actively undermining a deployed service member. The Uniform Code of Military Justice still recognizes adultery as a crime, and civilian courts in military communities tend to be sympathetic to service members. The evidence wasn't just going to defeat her divorce claims, it was going to annihilate them. The look on her face is going to be something, Sarah had said, and Marcus had realized that his sister was approaching this with the same strategic precision they'd both learned from their military father. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about justice. This was about making sure that someone who had betrayed a deployed soldier, who had planned to steal the benefits earned through combat and sacrifice, who had celebrated the idea of profiting from his service while he was in harm's way, got exactly what they deserved. Nothing. The hearing room at Joint Base Lewis McChord was smaller than a civilian courthouse, with government-issue furniture and a large American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. Judge Colonel Amanda Rivera, no relation to Jessica, was a 62-year-old military judge with 30 years of service and a reputation for being absolutely no-nonsense when it came to military family law. "Good afternoon," she said as they took their seats. "I understand we have a dissolution of marriage case today involving an active duty service member. Mrs. Rivera, you're seeking divorce and equitable distribution of marital assets?" Jessica stood, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Yes, Your Honor. My husband and I have been married for 10 years, and during that time, he has accumulated significant assets through his military service. I believe I'm entitled to my fair share, especially given how much I sacrificed while he was deployed." Judge Rivera nodded and turned to Marcus. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, do you contest your wife's claims regarding the marital assets?" Marcus rose slowly, his posture military perfect, his eyes meeting the judge's without wavering. "Your Honor, I don't contest that assets were accumulated during our marriage. However, I believe there's significant confusion about the nature and divisibility of those assets under military law." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Confusion, Staff Sergeant? Please elaborate." And that's when Marcus Hayes allowed himself a small smile. Not triumphant, not cruel. Just the satisfied expression of a soldier who'd executed a perfect operation. "Your Honor, I'd like to present my complete financial disclosure, along with supporting evidence regarding the grounds for this divorce. As he handed a thick folder to the bailiff, Jessica felt the first cold finger of dread trace down her spine. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Derek Chen was frowning, his legal instincts screaming that they'd walked into an ambush. Judge Rivera opened the folder, and her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something that looked like stern disapproval. She looked at the documents, then at Marcus, then at Jessica, then back at the documents. "Mr. Chen," she said slowly, "did you conduct a thorough asset investigation before filing this case?" Chen leaned forward, suddenly uncertain. "Your Honor, we relied on the preliminary financial disclosures and standard military divorce calculations." "Then you should have consulted a military divorce specialist," Judge Rivera interrupted. "Because according to this disclosure, Staff Sergeant Hayes' divisible marital assets amount to—" Jessica leaned forward, her heart hammering. This was it. The house equity, the pension, the benefits, $400,000, maybe more. Enough for her and Javier to start their new life. Judge Rivera looked up from the papers, her eyes finding Jessica's across the courtroom. Negative $47,000. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Jessica's world tilted sideways. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Chen said, his voice tight with disbelief. "Did you say negative?" "That's correct," Colonel Brooks said, rising to her feet. "Your Honor, may I explain?" Judge Rivera nodded, and Brooks continued with the precision of a military briefing. The marital home has been refinanced, with all equity withdrawn to satisfy legitimate family debt obligations. Current value, $340,000. Current mortgage balance, $387,000. Net equity, negative $47,000. Jessica felt the room spinning. The thrift savings plan was liquidated through a legal hardship withdrawal to establish an irrevocable trust for family members, a legitimate use of retirement funds that removes them from the marital estate. Chen was frantically flipping through his files. Staff Sergeant Hayes' military pension is not yet vested for division purposes under the Uniformed Services Former Spouses Protection Act, as it requires at least 10 years of marriage overlapping with military service. They've been married 10 years, but Staff Sergeant Hayes didn't join the military until after they were married. He has 16 years of service, but only 8 of those years overlap with the marriage. Under the 10-10 rule, the pension is not divisible. Did you know about the 10-10 rule? Most people don't. Leave a comment if this surprised you. Jessica's vision blurred. Everything she'd planned, everything Derek had promised her. Furthermore, Brooks continued, Staff Sergeant Hayes' VA disability benefits are entirely exempt from divorce settlements under federal law. His current disability rating of 70% provides $3,200 per month, but not $1 of that can be awarded to a former spouse. Your Honor, Chen said, his voice coming from very far away. This is clearly a fraudulent conveyance of assets. We demand a full investigation. But Judge Rivera was already shaking her head. Mr. Chen, I've reviewed the documentation. Every transaction was legal, properly documented, and executed in accordance with military regulations. Staff Sergeant Hayes had every right to restructure his finances, especially given what I'm seeing in the second part of this file. She lifted several photographs from the folder, her expression hardening. Mrs. Rivera, are you acquainted with a Mr. Javier Mendoza? Jessica's heart stopped. Because I have here multiple photographs and video evidence, taken from security cameras legally installed in Staff Sergeant Hayes' residence, showing you and Mr. Mendoza in compromising situations, while Staff Sergeant Hayes was deployed to a combat zone. The room fell absolutely silent. Do you understand, Judge Rivera said, her voice like ice, that under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, adultery committed by or with a military spouse is taken extremely seriously? Do you understand that Washington state law allows for fault-based divorce considerations? Jessica couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. How had this happened? How had the man she'd dismissed as a simple soldier who followed orders orchestrated something so devastating? Your Honor, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. This can't be legal. He can't just hide everything. Mrs. Rivera, Judge Rivera said, not unkindly but with absolute firmness. Your husband didn't hide anything. He restructured his finances legally. The timing may seem suspicious to you, but the law is clear. Furthermore, given the evidence of marital infidelity, you have no grounds to contest these actions. She looked at the papers again, then directly at Jessica. I find that Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes has proven adultery by clear and convincing evidence. I find that the marital estate consists of one primary residence with negative equity and no other divisible assets. Therefore, I grant the dissolution of marriage. No asset division is ordered, as there are no assets to divide. No spousal support is ordered, given the fault grounds and the respondent's lack of need. The residence will be sold, with any proceeds after the mortgage is satisfied to be split equally, though based on current market conditions, I anticipate no proceeds. She looked at Jessica one last time. Mrs. Rivera, you married a soldier who served his country honorably for 16 years, who survived 3 combat tours, who earned medals for bravery. And while he was overseas in harm's way, you betrayed him, mocked him, and plotted to take everything he'd earned. I hope whatever you thought you'd gain was worth what you've lost. The gavel came down with a sound like a rifle shot. Jessica sat there staring at the empty space where her future used to be, while the soldier she had underestimated stood at attention, saluted the judge, and walked out with his honor intact and his assets protected. Everything except the truth, that she had destroyed her own life with her greed, her betrayal, and her fatal underestimation of a combat veteran who knew how to plan, execute, and win. 1 month later, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes sat in the JAG office at Joint Base Lewis McChord, signing papers with military precision. The asset transfer documents were thick, complex, and absolutely legal. Everything that had been temporarily restructured for Marcus's protection was now being restored to him, exactly as planned. Are you satisfied with how the operation concluded? Sarah asked her brother, who stood at the window in his dress uniform, looking out at the parade ground. Marcus poured himself a drink from the bottle Sarah had brought to celebrate, the same brand they'd shared when he came home from his first deployment. I'm satisfied that justice was served. Jessica made her choice. She chose to betray our marriage while I was in combat, to plan my financial destruction, to celebrate taking everything I'd earned through sacrifice. I made sure she got exactly what she deserved. Sarah signed the final document with a flourish. Nothing, Marcus agreed, as his sister handed him the papers that restored everything. Except maybe a lesson about underestimating soldiers. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. Really smiled for the first time in months. Coffee this weekend? There's this veteran-owned cafe near the base I've been wanting to try. Rachel Chen was a nurse at the VA hospital where he did his physical therapy. Former Army medic, 2 tours in Iraq, and completely unimpressed by sob stories or excuses. She'd actually laughed when he told her about the divorce. A woman who cheats on a deployed soldier deserves exactly what she got. Nothing, she'd said. Which means you're starting fresh. That's not a bad thing. Meanwhile, across town, Jessica Rivera sat in her studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, the only place she could afford with her boutique retail job. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she figured out her next move after the divorce settlement. Instead, it had become her reality. Javier had stopped returning her calls 3 days after the hearing. Apparently, a woman with no money and no prospects wasn't nearly as attractive as a woman who was about to inherit hundreds of thousands of dollars. The friends who had eagerly helped her plan her new life had suddenly become busy with other commitments. The wellness center remained a fantasy. The luxury car stayed a dream, and every day she found herself ringing up purchases that cost more than she made in a week. One afternoon she saw him, Marcus, walking through the base exchange with a woman she didn't recognize. A pretty woman in scrubs with an easy laugh, wearing a simple outfit that somehow looked better than Jessica's designer clothes ever had. They looked happy, relaxed, like people who had never known what it felt like to lose everything because of their own choices. As she watched them disappear into a restaurant, Jessica Rivera finally understood the lesson her ex-husband had taught her. Smart soldiers don't get even. They plan the mission, execute with precision, and make sure that when justice comes, it comes with perfect, devastating accuracy. If you were Marcus, would you have done the same thing? Or did he go too far? Do you think Jessica got what she deserved, or should Marcus have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And what about Javier? Should he face any consequences for his role in this? Let me know what you think. Like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.